It was unquestionably his design to inveigh against the doctrine of the Trinity by one part of this assertion, just like the individuals that the Bible calls prophets from Jesus and before, and to condemn the idolatry of his countrymen by the other. They were strongly addicted to the worship of three female entities, known by the names of Alat, Manat, and Al-Uzza. Al-Uzza is also known as Shemyaza, whom they impiously denominated the daughters of God. As was to be expected, the ridicule and opposition he met with from his hearers put his patience to many trials. Well, how can you just say that these really were false gods, and but they weren't the real Trinity? I guess. Yeah, he'd serve himself a lot better if he wasn't inserting a bunch of stuff that he didn't have to. Well, I mean, if he was just putting insult in, which he says over here is like, oh, well, we shouldn't use insult and ill nature and stuff like this, but we're going to do it anyways. So there's contradictions in what he has to say, just like the whole 30. Oh, well, he never claimed, and then he was trying to program people for years before, 15 years prior to. It doesn't make any sense. People did not hesitate to pronounce him a sorcerer. They openly called him a liar and viewed everything he uttered as impertinent and fabulous. It is almost impossible to conceive how mortifying it must have been to his native pride and ambition to be treated with less ceremony than a ballad singer, as the mildness of his temper prevented him from betraying his intentions, or giving ground to suspect him as the author of a forgery by flying out into gusts of passion. Well, having an emotional response doesn't prove that you don't authentically believe what you're saying. So his ready wit, of which he must be acknowledged to have had a very large share, seldom deserted him altogether on any critical emergency. Yet, amidst the innumerable objections he had encountered on all hands, many of which he could not always be in readiness to alleviate, he was sometimes left in absolute silence to the small diversion of those who opposed him. Well, just like in the Bible for Jesus, he said, it's not my own doctrine, so if I like something or don't like something, or, if I don't know something, I'm just going to say I don't know something or keep quiet, and, he wasn't a Cassandra, in other words. The cause he had espoused being so supported by argument, to ward off the rational objections that fell on him from every quarter, starting on his first appearance in public. When a man undertakes to talk of Mohammed, it would require the artifice of the devil himself to bear him always through. Wait, doesn't that mean that to not accept the arguments in every subject, every type of philosophy you can see supported by the Quranic discourse, and it doesn't, science itself doesn't disagree with it, but a lot of Christian doctrine in particular does, and a lot of that's supported by the Bible, those differences with Islam. His wonderful patience under persecution and his forbearing to revenge any insult, though he could have certainly wished to do it. Well, wishing to do it and doing it is a different thing. And he was overwhelmed. It wasn't like, he just appeared and conquered everybody who disagreed with him or anything like that. He had a very considerable share in blunting the edge of opposition. Add to this, he had a peculiar talent of flattery, which he leveled against the weak side of the great and opulent with such a masterly hand that he procured their protection and made many of them converts. Well, you know, as opposed to certain Christian factions where they were told that they were sinners and unworthies and stuff. Muhammad told people that you're worthy of what you're capable of. You're worthy as far, that you can, you can be accepted by God on your own merits. So that's what he meant. It is so extremely natural for mankind to love commendation that few are always proof against its most formidable attacks. If any are so, it must be the man who has not only an extensive education, but a penetrating judgment and an enlarged understanding. Well, the two can go together. You don't have to be degraded to be in a line with education, To such a man, flattery always appears either as the disguise of wickedness or a design to ridicule. Well, not quite. The partition between flattery and honest praise is so very thin that a wise man will reject all commendation bestowed upon him to his face, that he may not run the hazard of being imposed upon nor carried out of himself by the suggestions of vanity. But those with whom Mohammed was concerned were not proof against flattery under his artificial management. He gained the ascendancy over many of the first rank in life, which he no doubt considered as a favorable prelude to the surrender of the poor. Although he labored 4 years for converts to his cause, yet the next year of his mission added 30 to their number. The influence of example is always very powerful, but that of the opulent over their dependents and inferiors can seldom be resisted. And a lot of his, even among those who didn't believe him, he was known for his opulence of character, but not wealth or anything. He was never the richest around, even after becoming leader of the state. His affluent circumstances put it also in his power to bribe the needy, which he brought in to assist the example of the great, and the united force of these two accomplished his design. And so as they grouped together funds, they helped out the needy, even needy who did not believe. It was known they didn't believe. It has often been said that poverty is a foe to honesty, and perhaps it is capable of doing as much mischief to man's religious creed. Well, nowadays, a lot of the so-called charitable organizations are coercing people, saying, you must speak English or French and read the Bible in this language and call yourself by a French or English name or we won't give you food. So people, it's like, oh, look at all these converts we got to Christianity because we said, come here and show up an area where there's a famine and with a little bit of food and hand out some food at the door and, oh, look at all these people at the church. They've all accepted, they've been saved, all of them. Either be charitable or not, right? Or if you're going to be charitable to your own, to your faith group, whatever. Because that makes sense to be charitable to them first. The offer of plenty to him who is plunged into the extremity of want is a strong temptation to make a sacrifice of conscience. Well, it wasn't like the mass of them were deciding, if the conscience was, well, I guess I get some food if I'm not Christian. That doesn't even make sense. The offer of plenty to him who is plunged into, the effect it produced in the deserts of Arabia, where men of little religion had the less sacrifice to make. A craving stomach spoke louder than reason, and the loaves and fishes wrought wonders in his favor. While there were food-related miracles, far more than were attributed to Jesus, and far more historical in that respect than any of the miracles attributed to Jesus. But actually, it served to do the opposite for the most part. Practically the whole Arabian Peninsula was converted to Islam before. There were still minorities throughout, but they were converted before, when it was a time when becoming Muslim meant losing wealth, if anything. In addition to all the arts we have already mentioned, he incessantly applied those passions of the human mind and his promises and threatenings, which were chiefly consulted in the regulation of their conduct. God has consequences for those who violate the rights of others and, don't do what's right. Their hopes and fears felt his heaviest artillery, as the human and hell of his own manufacturing will abundantly evince. Again, most of these warnings and encouragements are very strongly supported by the Bible and pretty much any other thing. So if there was going to be a new prophet, wouldn't the new prophet be according, wouldn't he revise, wouldn't he correct the issues that had, crept into there? In his paradise, he said, there were many rivers and curious fountains, continually sending forth pleasing streams. Near these, he told his followers, they should repose themselves on most delicate and sumptuous beds, adorned with gold and precious stones, under the shadow of the trees of paradise, yielding them all manner of pleasant fruits, and that there they should enjoy most beautiful women, who would not cast an eye on any but themselves. He likewise assured them of receiving most delicious liquors and pleasant wines, without having their enjoyment interrupted by intervals of intoxication. This fulsome stuff was a tidbit for the stomach of an Arabian, constitutionally addicted to the love of pleasure. Well, all human beings like pleasure, but hedonism is when you regard the consequences in terms of pain and stuff too. Entirely suited to the palate of its voluptuous author, it is not difficult to make men believe what they wish to be true, and of consequence, no picture of human happiness to be enjoyed in futurity could have been drawn so completely capable of subduing their opposition, inflaming their desires, and of triumphing over the dictates of reason and conscience. In the barren, parched sands of Arabia, what could be so much an object of desire as a cooling shade from the almost vertical rays of the meridian sun, or the copious draughts of refreshing, cooling liquors to men burning with thirst, as in drinks. But Islam does not teach that there's intoxication in the hereafter. And intoxication doesn't have quite the effect on cooling and warming as people have convinced themselves. Such images increased the native impetuosity of their passions, and hurried them into the vortex of his design. How is it impious to say you have to take care of the orphans and all that stuff? Oh, because it's not Christian piety. It's not labeled as Christian, so that's where it is. Not accepting the contradictions of the Bible is regarded as delusion. Okay. That's where it's coming from. But if his description of heaven was peculiarly enchanting to those whom he aimed to deceive, his hell was no less terrible to the same description of men. He affirmed that such as would receive his divine message should drink boiling, and who would not receive his divine message should drink boiling and stinking water, breathe nothing but hot winds, and dwell in continual fire, and be surrounded with the black salt smoke, eat briars and thorns, and the fruit of the tree zaqqum. It's a stifling kind of, like dying from a cold over and over again, basically, which would be in their bellies like a burning pitch. Well, if it was a divine message, see? You don't get to choose what the divine message is, like Jesus in the Bible saying that it wasn't his own doctrine, which applies all sorts of things, doesn't it, by itself, right? Against Christian doctrine, of course. It is astonishing with what artifice and cunning these portraits are delineated. How terrible must it have been to a native of the torrid zone, visited with the intolerable heat of the sun reflected from the burning sands as from the mouth of an oven, and whose very zephyrs were fire, to think that such would be his state through everlasting ages if he should continue to reject the inspiration of the Quran. Well, again, if the Quran's inspiration from God rather than just Muhammad contriving ideas. And didn't he just admit that the Quran can't be imitated? So if it's superior linguistically to the Bible, you think God could inspire a better book, right? Of course, we're not saying that the Bible is a criticism of prophets before Muhammad. By the perpetual sounding of such rewards and punishments in the ears of his countrymen, Muhammad terrified some and allured others into belief in his mission. But he had still another engine for battering down his opposition, and that was his threatening the most dreadful judgments here upon earth in case of non-compliance with what he favored. He gave them to understand that the old world was destroyed by a deluge for their disobedience to Noah, that Sodom was consumed by fire and brimstone from heaven for his treatment of Lot, and the Egyptians drowned in the Red Sea for the rejecting the mission of Moses. To these and such like instances of the divine displeasure against the workers of iniquity, he added a fiction. He added about the destruction of Ad and Thamud, totally destroyed for similar reasons. And it turns out that Ad and Thamud, according to modern science, is more historical than some of the other ones, even if you omit some of the features of the Bible that had, been proven wrong. It seems like every major story practically has, if not the small ones, have details that have, so mostly true historical as far as history says, but something which, shows at the very least that the whole thing was edited. Now, if land be an object of desire to the shipwrecked mariner, drink to the parched tongue are ease to such as are tormented with the gout. All the promises and threatenings of Muhammad must have been equally the objects of desire and aversion. Well, that could be why it appealed to the Mongols, right? And here it is obvious to remark that there was no sort of analogy between the above judgments which reason would soon have pointed out to the Arabs, had not their hopes and fears been their principles of action. It was a sophistical inference that because the Egyptians and Sodomites were made the visible monuments of the wrath of insulted heaven, metanomial, kind of like the Chinese usage here, therefore all who rejected his claim to a divine commission would also be punished, for they were rendered inexcusable by their open contempt of the warnings of Jehovah, pronounced Yahweh, increasing existence, which again implies that there can't be a Trinity, just in that term, are the miracles which were performed to subdue their unbelief, whereas the Arabians rejected the lunatic, the Arabians rejected of a man who could only assert without a single evidence of the truth of his assertion. So, if someone says, well, it's in the Bible, then that's more than enough proof. But other people, if they, use philosophy, or they use, he wasn't philosophizing, but you know what I mean. He a way of thinking and stuff like this. And there's all these allusions to the forces of nature and all that too in the middle of this. In the above manner, he continued to propagate his message, which acquired additional strength so fast that many whom no promises could as yet allure, nor threatenings intimidate, began to be alarmed, such as, because they saw it a threat to their own wealth and power, or at least they were being asked to do things or not do things that were contrary to their own personal desires, which is what you'll find of pretty much with everybody who doesn't accept Islam. It's not that they can prove something wrong, it's that they just don't, they'd rather believe something else, or they'd rather do something else, or they'd rather not do something, such as were supremely ignorant and excessively addicted to adulterous worship, but the same type of worship as a Christian is considered, not okay. Doesn't make sense. It's passing the buck, really. Could not hear his invectives against such a practice without fear or indignation. To have pulled the meat from their mouths out of the most pungent stings of hunger would not have been considered as greater injustice and barbarity than the exclaiming against what they considered to be their deities. But men of penetration and discernment were alarmed for another reason. They saw a system making rapid strides towards maturity. Tyranny to their intolerance, tyranny to their injustice, basically. But freedom of faith for all, even the idolaters. And justice is good for most people. I mean, in terms of this world, other people are like, oh, no, I'm my wealth and power is because of how I, which, if not finally suppressed, in a state of infancy might soon divest them of all their possessions. This made them resolve to cut off the object of their terror and disgust, let the consequences of what they would, as they rightly judged, that of two difficulties the least should be chosen. Humanity itself can be scarcely help lamenting that they did. Christianity itself can scarcely help lamenting that they did not succeed. By the time inference and vigorous assertions of Abu Talib, his uncle, he was delivered from premeditated massacre to be a scourge to the world of polytheism and disbelief. It does not appear that this man ever espoused the religion of his nephew, but such was his affection for him, according to Sunnis. But there's indication that among Shia narrations, but such was his affection for him, far exceeding what is commonly found in that degree of consanguinity, blood relation, that all his power and influence became devoted to his service when in danger from his enemies. Mohammed, being constantly urged to work miracles in confirmation of his mission by all those who continued proof against his arts of seduction. Well, the linguistic thing, they're like, well, I've never been known as a poet, so if I'm not having this revealed to me, your poets could do better than me. And, they admitted it was something different. It didn't have those extra sounds for style. It didn't, So the Arabic words for poetry and prose don't apply to the Quran. He was galled to the very soul and greatly at a loss what answer to return. But being now so accustomed to the sneers of waggery or the terrible blows of the rejection of reason and argument, he received them as things of course, and his presence of mind, cooperating with his ready wit, seldom left him for any length of time in total stupefaction. So, the living word thing in the Bible has Jesus promote, that Muhammad was very strong in that aspect, that he was ready to live the teachings in every example and assert spiritual guidance on all issues. He therefore told them, without seeming to be much disconcerted, that the working of miracles formed no part in his apostleship. Well, no, Not really, but he wasn't going to send he didn't have the authority to bring about a sign just because they wanted a sign or just to do what they want. That's not what religion is for. It's to that the working of miracles for being entitled by God to preach the rewards of paradise and the punishments of hell, the dignity of his own character, and the submission of all men were required to pay to him as the prophet of God. And of course, he was not allowed. He did not collect. He was forbidden from collecting any charity. Soon, however, did he perceive the impotency of his argument. They considered it as reasoning in a circle to prove his mission by itself. Well, if your mission is religion and you agree with the natural world, you've kind of gone beyond the. There's more to it than just your own ideas. But if you are divinely inspired, let us see your credentials, for God will send no man upon such an errand as you assert. You will come on without such undeniable tokens of the veracity of the messenger, as all men must believe, if not resolutely blind, finding the people more than a match for him and canvassing the merits of his excuse. Well, he accepted more and more accepted because of what they actually saw as a response. He said that their predecessors had treated the miracles of Saleh and other prophets of their own country with such ridicule and contempt that God was determined that they should never have an opportunity of behaving so again. If we suppose that this nonsense of this story was an object of general belief among the Arabs, as we think it was, it behooved to have greater weight with his hearers than his former apology. And again, the argument wasn't that, they're never going to be allowed a miracle again.